Now today we're going to be doing a little bit about air gap intakes. Now this is a hit or miss with a lot of people. Me, I think for the extra money of the air gap it's not worth it, considering the reality of it and my theory of it. Now a lot of people have their own theories, obviously, everyone's entitled to their own, and if you ask from automotive enthusiast, everyone has their own opinion on the way things should be done. There's theory about things, but this is just my theory about it. Now, if I'm not mistaken, it's only about a 7 horsepower gain from the air gap to the non-air gap version, which doesn't really seem, number one, like it's worth the extra cost for that little bit of horsepower. Number two, if I'm not mistaken, all the dyno tests were done on an engine dyno in an engine dyno room, which doesn't really give real world effects on these intakes, which is going to make the big difference to me. Now, the reason I say that is because the way I see it is there really is no difference, and I see that the non-air gap version is a better way to go, because one, even if you don't have something stock, if you got something radical with a good size cam, that little bit of heat through the crossover and the atomization you get kind of helps you idle a little bit, kind of helps you a little bit at the low end when you're cruising around. Now obviously a drag car is a little bit different, you don't really need it, especially if you just make a hit and go and shut the engine off and back it down to the pits. But also, the fact is, as advertised, the air gap is supposed to have cool air come in front of it, go up under the runners and plenum, dissipate all the heat, and create a cooler intake for cooler air intake fuel charge. So, which is great in theory and all, but now let's take, for example, you're cruising around or you're driving your daily driver and you have the air gap intake on it. Now, especially in the summertime and even in the springtime, you're driving it around and you drive for 30, 40 minutes, hour and a half, however long you want to go. There's a lot of heat built up under that hood. There's really, and since aluminum's such a heat tank, it can absorb heat and dissipate heat. Well, since there's more heat, it's going to absorb it. Now, when you think about the cool charge coming through, when you're driving around, the cool charge is actually coming through the radiator. Now, I don't know about you, but most of the time, whenever your engine's been running a while, put your hand on the other side of the fan, see if it's blowing or feel it. It's pretty hot. It's not that cool, so it's really not cooling down the intake as much as it really should. Now, also for the simple fact of, you got to think about a wind tunnel under there. Is it really getting cool air through there around all the obstacles and cooling it off as well? I don't think it really is. Now also, since it is such a great heat sink, it still pulls and gathers the heat from the cylinder heads as well as the valley, and that heat still goes through all that aluminum, so you're still getting a lot of heat buildup regardless, because you're not getting a cool enough charge through the radiator in order to cool it down enough to actually make that big of a difference. Now, one other thing I'd like to point out is that when you think about it, most people hate the heat crossover because the amount of heat that it puts on the air and gas, making your air and gas hotter. Now, honestly, after about 4,000 RPMs and higher, the air and gas is moving so quickly through the plenum and through the runners that it's really not going to affect it anymore, because it's sucking so much air through the carburetor and it's going by so fast, it's not being able to heat up as much as it was sitting idle. Now, what we are going to do is run these two engines. Now, both these are in C10s. Both of them have a 4-core radiator. Both of them are 454s. Both of them have 781 cylinder heads. Both of them have a 180-degree thermostats. They're both running headers. They both got the same ignition setup. The only real difference is, obviously, one's cow induction, one's not. And one has They have different carburetors and they have different cams. So for the most part, we got a pretty similar setup to test on, and we're going to see the heat build up on each one and see where they're at. We're going to let them get up to temp, let them run for a little bit with the hoods down, and see what the temperature actually comes up onto from basically the front of the plenum and the side of the plenum, and see our temperature difference. Okay, there it is. Now that was running it shortly for about 10 minutes on both of them, same time, and there really wasn't a whole lot of temperature difference. So unfortunately, what they say about the air gap to me really isn't that true, especially on something that like this street truck. You're gonna drive it on the street a lot, it's gonna build up a lot of heat under the hood. And like I said, at higher RPMs, it's moving through there so fast that it's not really going to heat it down or cool it down that much. The better alternative to get a cooler air intake fuel temperature is to, one, probably like this, a cowl induction, and then find some way to cool down your gas. That's kind of old school, but it worked. So that's what I'll stick to. But there it is. Honestly, in my opinion, unless you're full out drag racing, save your money, get the non-air gap. You'll probably be happier with the non-air gap anyway in the winter time. Now, my other truck that I used to drive every day, I'll admit, I thought the air gap intake was great. And then I started driving it in the winter time and getting down 30 and 20 degrees and even colder when it snowed and everything. It was honestly not fun to drive anymore. It took a while to heat up. Once it got up to temp, it was good, but for a daily driver, it was honestly not that great. Now, if you're up north, it's probably even worse. So there was that to think about as well. But that's my theory on air gap intakes. You don't have to take my word for it. I would recommend not running air gap intakes on most of your applications. Now obviously once you get up into the higher performance intakes, they're almost all basically air gaps anyway, so it is what it is. Now if you still want to run an air gap intake, go ahead, but me personally, I think you're better off spending that extra money that you would have spent on an air gap intake elsewhere to improve your performance. And as always, thanks for watching.